Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. With the War of the Rohirrim film now released and the game fully released and in everyone's hands, let's paint some Rohan buildings. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. The Rohan buildings that you get in the War of the Rohirrim starter set aren't brand new. I believe they came out in 2019, or at least around that time, but they are fantastic buildings. Some of the best modular building kits that Games Workshop has ever done, in my opinion. And in this video, I want to show you how you can get them looking like this very easily. Some very simple techniques using an awful lot of contrast paint in a very easy slap it on kind of way. To start off, they're built as usual and primed black with the rattle can. Now what I'm doing to get the most out of those contrast paints is to provide a really good zenithal underpainting, pre-highlight, pre-shade, whatever you like to call it, and it just really leans into the detail, allowing you to get the most out of those contrast paints we're going to use later on. However, if you're not an airbrush user, this is where people start to get annoyed with the video, and I can understand it to a certain extent. You can get around this, go for a mid-grey or mid to light grey, something like, if you come from the UK, the Halfords grey primer that people have used for years for their miniature wargaming, and then give it a good dry brush and white afterwards, and you'll get something fairly close to the effect I have here. But to go back to the airbrushing, for those who are airbrush curious, have an airbrush already, you go really light with the white paint and slowly build it up. You can keep an awful lot of that black there in the recess, which is what you want to do, because it really boosts those shadows that you're going to get when you apply the contrast paint afterwards, which does half the work for you. It means less painting in the long run. So I'm almost kind of sketching this on, allowing all of those individual planks of woods to keep the dark in the recesses. The same with the thatch on the top. I'm choosing the angle that I point my airbrush at, that I hold the miniature, allowing the paint to kind of graze past it a little bit. It's a bit like dry brushing in many ways with the airbrush, and just a lighter touch. And after you've done this a few times, you get the hang of it. It's quite hard to describe. Works the same on the fences as well. Then after that, even with the airbrush, I will dry brush. And this is kind of slap chop-esque, I suppose. But what I'm really doing here is leaning into all this fantastic detail that is on the miniature. All of that wood grain, all of that thatch detail. It's screaming out for a dry brush. And the reason I'm dry brushing as well, because it really accentuates that. And you'll see the effect that it gives you later on, because we are going to be applying lots and lots of glazes and washes with contrast paint. But we're not going to be highlighting afterwards. Maybe a little bit of a dry brush, but we're not going to be spending ages brush highlighting. And by adding all of this highlight underneath the paint, it lifts it and makes it easier and gives you a beautiful finish. You end up with these two very grayscale looking buildings. Three contrast paints here. I've chosen Skeleton Horde, Camo Green and Garagak Sewer. You can pick a different mix. What you really want is two browns or something from the brown spectrum and a green. I always like to add a green in, and I've used this technique a lot, slightly different colours, different times. But if you've watched my landship tutorial, watch one of my recent tutorials on terrain as well with wood in it, you'll have seen me using a similar technique. But I'm adding them to my palette, adding water, probably 33% water, so they're quite thin, almost wash-like, but then I'm painting them on, and I've got all three at the same time, and I'm wet blending them together. So you want to work relatively quickly. You don't want to be drying on the model before you've blended them in. You don't want any streaks on there. But because you've added that water, they do take that a little bit longer to fully dry. So you can have some fun here, really slap it on. Work with the wood grain. What we'll get at the end of this is a really nice kind of weathered silver wood effect. What you'll see is as I start to mix those three colours together, all of those wet paints, all of those runny contrast paints that I've thinned will start to blend together, so you get a seamless join between them, and you just get that effect of the weathered wood. At first you'll think, I've done this too thin, this isn't quite right, but once it dries you really see the effect coming through, and that's why that dry brushing and that grayscale underpainting effect at that stage is so important for this. You can see here I'm working with the wood grain, so painting in the direction of the planks of wood, going on with a darker colour first in most instances. That's probably going to be 50% of the colour I put down, and then adding in some of the green, and then adding in some of the contrast skeleton horde as well, because that just kind of thins it and blends it out, which means you have that real kind of variation in different colours. For this second building, I'm adding in contrast gore grunt of fur just to add a different element of colour to it. This is more of a reddish brown. Now, it's not going to drastically change the colour between this and the other building. Very, very subtle, but it does add a little bit of variation. I just want it to appear that the buildings may be built at a separate time, maybe weathered in a different way, looked after better, treated better. Whatever headcanon you want to put to it, but it's just a little bit of variation, but it also demonstrates how you can use other colours and get a very similar effect. I often think this is maybe a bit too thin, this isn't quite going to work out, but once it dries, it's amazing how it just seems to darken slightly and just really kind of blend all together. You'll see in a moment. So here we have Iandan yellow and Nazdrag yellow, so two yellow contrast paints. So I'm not thinning these, I want these to be a little bit more vibrant. I'm just painting down in the direction of travel that the rain would run down these buildings. You could go sideways, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but because of the detail is running that way, it's less resistance against the brush as well, which means it's less likely to flick and splatter everywhere. And one thing when you're working with contrast paints that you've thinned or you're slapping them on like this, they can get quite messy, and you'll see my fingers get messier and messier throughout this video. After I've got 2/3 of the yellow down, mixing between the two, I've brought that palette back over and I'm adding some contrast skeleton horde a little bit, but more of that green back in. Again, wet blending it in, mixing it all in, making it look like a little bit weathered. Think of all of the cold weather and the rain and things that those buildings would go through, and it just looks really cool when it dries. This is Contrast Black Legion, and I'm going to be using this on the windows, and I'm just painting it in directly over all the little iron frames that are inside as well. Don't worry about that. The fact that they've already been dry brushed will show up through that contrast paint, even though we'll have a little effect to go on them afterwards. But just painting them straight in, trying to not get it on the wood that you finished. If you do splash it on the wood, just rinse your brush off quickly and then dab it away. Same thing for those smaller slits as well, and you're really just a couple of brush strokes and you're done. This is white grey from Vallejo model colour, and any kind of off-white or greyish tinted white will work. What you just don't want is something super, super bright, otherwise it might show up a little bit too much. This is extremely subtle dry brushing here. I've taken so much off the brush, mostly circular motions, but a little bit side to side, always to the side of the grain. And you want to just pick it up just a little touch. You don't want it to look white. You don't want any streaking marks when you've gone too heavy. So if anything, you want to go back and do multiple layers and build it up rather than accidentally go too thick with it. So almost have too little paint on the brush rather than make the mistake. But just slowly building a little bit of that detail back in, and it just silvers the wood even more and just really gives it that beautiful finish. Following exactly the same colour, exactly the same process over onto that thatch as well, and it just really starts to tie it all back in again and just give a little bit of light and texture back into that after you've added all of that yellow. And it's pretty much a matter now of just going back over these whole buildings with the lightest of dry brushes, just picking out that detail. And they look pretty cool already. You could just whack them on the table now and they'd be done. If you didn't have an airbrush and you went for the grey part to start with a rattle can and a dry brush and slapped on some contrast paints, you're golden and they look great. We're going to add a few more details though. So this is Dwarven Iron from Two Thin Coats, but you could go with any gunmetal style metallic paint that you have in your collection. I'm just picking out things like the door hinges and a few other details. This detailing over the door, you could do all sorts with it. Some people will paint it as like a green or a red or something, or even paint it as white, so it's painted wood. I've decided to paint it in a metallic colour as if there's a sort of fake leafing effect going on the wood. So it's really up to you what you do. And as I add more of these buildings to my collection, I will change that. And I'll show you some pictures at the end of the video of some of these that I've painted before, very, very different styles for some of those. So very much up to you. Same goes for these designs over the door. You can paint them as white or something like that. Again, I'm going for metallic colours on this. And you've got the little crossbars as well with little stud work, which you might want to paint in as metal. As an alternative to silver, I'm using Viking gold here, which is a kind of brassy metallic gold from the Metal and Alchemy range from scale 75. I'm just picking out another little bit of detail here over the doorway, Same with that design that's on this kind of roof annex here, or apex. Again, just an alternative to the silver, an alternative to painting in white or red or green or something like that. And this is a soft artist's pencil, a 6B, I think. This is a cheap one from the Works in the UK, so a really cheap artist pencil. And I'm just rubbing that over the raised detail, which would be, I suppose, the lead lining of these cheap thin glass panel windows that they have. And it's as simple as that. Just rub it over the black that's already there, and it will give you this nice dull metal look. Now you could use that dwarven iron as well and just paint them in, but this is so much quicker and easier. To highlight those metals a little bit, this is Game Air Silver, and I'm just doing the subtlest of highlights on those little cross beams there and any little bits that were in that dwarven iron colour. And for the highlight of the gold areas, this is Elven Gold from that same scale colour paint range, and just a little touch at the top of the gold areas just to make it a little of the lights catching just slightly. Then just to add some final touches, now I'm using a ready mixed oil wash from Scale Colour. Again, this is grease. If you have 50-50 mix of Agrax Earthshade and Seraphim Sepia, then that will give you the kind of colour that this is. And you could use those Citadel paints as a little wash on those metallic areas. They will dull that metallic, so you might want to go back and do a further highlight. With the oil paints, it's a bit more of a recessed shade. It runs into the detail and gets off the flat surfaces a little bit better. And you can just rub it off again afterwards, which you can't do with the Agrax Earthshade. So I'm using that because it's my thing, my favourite thing. If you're looking at this from a kind of beginner's painting point of view or a simple painting point of view, you may well not have really mixed oil paints in your collection. Just get an old brush and you're golden. You can try them. I do recommend them. They're not hard to use, but they're often seen as more advanced tools. And when they dry quite matte as well, so they almost give you a weathering effect. Well, not almost, they do give you a weathering effect. So I'm just applying that same oil paint, that same oil wash, all the way around the bottom sort of centimetre or so of the building, as if the dirt has washed up or the moisture is soaked up into the wood. It just gives you a really, really cool effect. I even used it to add a few streaks to the roof as well, just to accentuate where those green lines are. I'm just adding these in and they'll look a little bit darker. Again, like some moisture or rain has stained it as it ran down. And just finishing off with some Vallejo Diorama Effects European Mud Thick Mud. I'm just sort of stippling this on around that same bottom area of those buildings. And what this will do is, I don't like to add bases to my buildings. Some people do. I think it makes them harder to store for me. And it also means that they don't always go with every single mat you put it on. So I put these on a snow base, they will still fit. If I put them on a grass base, it will still fit, and so on and so on. But by adding this little bit of dirt around the edge, it does help them blend into your gaming mats more, makes them look like they're part of the environment rather than sort of floating along the top. So this just helps a little bit. And that's it. Lots of cheating, lots of really, really simple effects, but I think they look pretty cool. Let's have a look at some proper pictures. Always love painting terrain. It's always a little bit quicker, really nice palette cleanser after painting lots of miniatures, and I have been for my day job, commission painting at the moment. So these were fun to do, and it really didn't take me very, very long at all. So let me know what you think of them in the comments. I know that if you follow the channel a lot, you may have seen this wood technique before, maybe slightly different colours each time, but you see the kind of effects you can get from thin contrast paints when you've got detail in the miniature. And most often when you've got a miniature that's got wood grain, you've got detail that's just calling out for a very liquid type of paint just to run into, and you just get such easy effects with just dry brushing and glazing here. That's essentially all we've done. Very, very little proper brushwork, a little bit on the metallics and things, but not very much at all. And I think you can get really fantastic looking miniatures, really quite striking in some ways looking miniatures on the table without really any advanced techniques. Yes, there's a few what would be considered advanced tools and things like an airbrush, but you don't have to do those, I've already mentioned. Like oil paints, people may not have used before, but they're not as scary as people often think they are. And these are painted a few years ago using very, very similar techniques. So the underpainting, the dry brushing, but I used mainly contrast skeleton horde and apothecary white from the Citadel range. Again, contrast paints, but blending them together with a little bit of green, and you get that even lighter, more whitish wood looking effect as well. So I just wanted to show you there's different ways of doing them. This one you can see has a green door, shows you different ways of picking out that detail. Thank you very much for watching the video. Hope you're all enjoying getting stuck into your War of the Rohirrim starter sets and playing some games of the new edition, maybe starting to paint your own miniatures,
maybe starting to paint your terrain. And if you haven't, hopefully this video will go along the way to help you or give you an idea of how you may want to tackle yours. I think these buildings are just absolutely fantastic kits, and they're really geared to helping you make them look great with very low effort, really, and you can get some fantastic results from them. So hopefully you enjoy painting yours as much as I enjoyed painting these ones. If you have enjoyed the video, please do give it a like, drop a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. There's quite a few Middle-earth videos on there now, and lots quite recently around this new release, and there'll be lots more to come moving into the new year and beyond. But there's also lots of other stuff on the channel as well. Loads of Warhammer the Old World content, so go and check that out. Plus a plethora of other game systems and painting tutorials and discussion points and all those things. So there's over 400 videos I think now, so it's well worth checking out the other videos on the channel. If you'd like to support further, there's lots of links in the video description of ways you can do that. Primarily my Patreon is there. It's a really excellent way of helping me to keep doing what I'm doing, and there's 4 different tiers there. Those who just want to offer a little bit of support to those that would like some painting tuition or coaching as well. So there's different levels there to just suit all different people. Loads of affiliate links and things as well. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.